بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, we are continuing our study and we are on page 357. So we covered the ayat and some of the questions, and so now we want to look at some of the beneficial points. Of course, this is page 357 of the Mus'haf, ayat 54 to 58. So I'll mention the point and then you tell me which ayah we derived that particular point from. Number one, following the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a sign of being guided. Following the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a sign of being guided. Ayah number 54. وَإِن تُطِيعُوهُ تَهْتَدُوا. And if you obey him, then you will be guided. All right, so that's clear. Ayah number 54. Number two, conveying the message is the responsibility of the messenger, while guidance is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. So the Prophet's responsibility and the responsibility of the da'i is to guide people to that which they which will be of great benefit to them. But it's not his duty, and neither is he able to change their hearts. وَمَا عَلَى الرَّسُولِ إِلَّا الْبَلَاغُ الْمُبِينُ. Na'am. So ayah number 54 as well. Point number three, it is necessary for the caller to Allah to expend efforts in calling to him, but the results are in Allah's hands. It is necessary for the caller to, so the da'i needs to make considerable effort, needs to dedicate himself to inviting people to Allah, but the results are in Allah's hands. I think that's also clear that it's ayah number 54 as well. Number four, faith and good deeds are means to attaining authority on earth and peace, and also for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant victory to the Muslims. But that is conditional upon iman and good deeds. Which ayah gave us that particular meaning? Ayah number 55, indeed. Right, so that ayah is clear. That Allah has promised those who believe from amongst you and those who good deeds that He will give you istikhlaf, give you authority on earth. Number five, establishing prayer, giving zakah, and obedience to the messenger are means to acquiring mercy. If you establish your salah, pay your zakah, and you obey the messenger of Allah, then you will have Allah's mercy. Yes, ayah number 56. Number six, the servants and children should be disciplined in seeking permission at times when people's privacy is compromised or their awrah is exposed. Which ayah gave us that particular meaning? You say it is ayah number 58, indeed. Number seven, difficulty in matters should bring ease in rulings. Al-mashaqqatu tajlibu at-taysir. Meaning that when there is mashaqqa or difficulty, that's going to bring about ease. If someone is sick, then they do not have to fast in the month of Ramadan. The same with the traveler. If a person cannot stand while praying, that person can sit down. If you are unable to do any of the kaffarat in a particular order, then you move on to the next if there's a choice, or if there is a sequence. So, for instance, the kaffara for certain sins or penalties that you need to pay, like you have to free a slave. If you can't free a slave, then you move on to the next, which is to fast 2 consecutive months. If you cannot fast 2 consecutive months, then you have to feed 60 people, right? So there's like a hierarchy there. And if you can't do one, you move on to the next. And so it becomes easier and easier. And that is the nature of the Sharia. And that's just on the topic of rukhsah or concession. All right. Then we move on to the points of action. Number one, that we should pray our prayers in congregation on time. And one of the best ways to ensure that it's on time and that it's done properly is to pray it behind the Imam in congregation. And which ayah do you think motivates us to take that course of action? That we should pray our prayers in congregation. One of the best ways to do iqamatul salah or iqam salah is for us to head to the masjid and pray in congregation. So which ayah talks about establishing the prayer? Any ideas? Ayah number 56. Now, spend some of your wealth for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Which ayah motivates us to spend some of our wealth for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Also ayah number 56. Okay? Because وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ. Lastly, but of course there are many other points here, learn and teach the etiquette of seeking permission. And not just the permission for entering the rooms of others in your own home, but also the homes of others, as we had discussed in the previous ayah already. Yes, so definitely ayah number 58. And again, a reminder that the Quran not only speaks about matters of belief, it not only speaks about matters of law, but also matters of etiquette, matters of character. And so in that sense, it is a book that covers every conceivable aspect of human life. There isn't, can you think of anything that the Quran does not establish, that from which we cannot directly or indirectly gain guidance on any topic? So something for us to think about. Then we move on to the points of guidance. Following the Quran and Sunnah leads to happiness in both worlds. If we want happiness, if we want success, if we want the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we will follow the Quran and the Sunnah, and it will lead us there, both in this world and in the next. وَإِن تُطِيعُوهُ تَهْتَدُوا. Na'am. If you obey Allah and His Messenger, if you obey the Messenger, then you will be guided. And if you are guided, then what greater happiness could there be? The victory and establishment on earth and being given authority and to be given power, that is conditional. And which ayah tells us that it is so? That it has to be conditional. Or rather that it is conditional, not that it has to be, but it is conditional. We can't expect that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to grant us victory and we are not utilizing the means, or we are not fulfilling the conditions necessary. So you say that it's ayah number 55. Nah, because Allah promises those of you who believe and do good deeds, which means that the promise is for no one else except people who meet those criteria. The importance of comparing the present with the past, right? And so that you may learn from it, so that you may benefit from it and see how, for instance, let's think of one example. Right now, the Palestinians, and this is the situation since 1947, 1948, that they have been persecuted, that they have been, they have been killed, they have been removed from their homes, they have been made refugees, they have been targeted and harassed and persecuted. And we look at the present situation, and then we look into the past, like during the time of the Crusades, and we see that they were also massacred and killed, and they were made to become refugees, and their land was taken from them, and they were mistreated and oppressed by the Crusaders and the different states that existed at the time. Right, so there were like 3 or 4 Crusader states, the Kingdom of Jerusalem, etc. And then, of course, the Muslims fought battles against them. There was constant back and forth until finally Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, and then later the Mamluk state was able to expel them completely from Palestine and from Syria and Lebanon, and that was the end of the Crusaders. It took a long time, right? They arrived in Jerusalem in 1099 of the Common Era, and they were only expelled in 1291, right? So almost 200 years. It's a very long time, subhanAllah. So the era of the Crusades was long. And now the Muslims have been being persecuted by them all this time. If the Palestinians and the Muslims in general want to have victory over their enemies, then the only solution is not Arab unity. It is not working together with Bashar al-Assad and others, because this has been a problem since since a long time ago. You had all these different Arab states, and some of them went to war with Israel and lost badly. Some of them, gained some victories, but didn't really change the status quo. And if you look at all of those, like Iraq and Syria and Egypt, they were all ruled at the time by Ba'athist, socialist, atheist regimes. These people were not, in the sense, Muslims, because they did not rule by the Sharia, and neither did they believe, especially with people like the Assad family, did they believe in the core tenets of Islam, But anyway, that's not really what I want to talk about. But if you want to know why we failed, then I'm going to give you the ayah so that we can, inshallah, move on. But ayah number 55 tells us why we failed, because our wars were not waged for the sake of Allah. They were waged for what we can pan-Arabism, or whatever they called it at the time. The Arabs need to take these matters into their hands. The Arabs have to fight, and show who's who, and so on and so forth. And nothing to do with the deen. And that there's lots more to talk about, but I'll just draw your attention to that, and we move on for now, inshallah. Fine. On page 358, we now move on to the ayat 59 to 61. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وإذا بلغ الأطفال منكم الحلم فليستأذنوا كما استأذن الذين من قبلهم كذلك يبين الله لكم آياته والله عليم حكيم والقواعد من النساء اللاتي لا يرجون نكاحا فليس عليهن جناح أن يضعن ثيابهن غير متبرجات بزينة وأن يستعففن خير لهن والله سميع عليم ليس على الأعمى حرج ولا على الأعرج حرج ولا على المريض حرج ولا على أنفسكم أن تأكلوا من بيوتكم أو بيوت آبائكم أو بيوت أمهاتكم أو بيوت إخوانكم أو بيوت إخوانكم أو بيوت أخواتكم أو بيوت أعمامكم أو بيوت عماتكم أو بيوت أخوالكم أو بيوت أخوالكم أو بيوت خالاتكم أو ما ملكتم مفاتحه أو صديقكم ليس عليكم جناح أن تأكلوا جميعا أو أشتاتا فإذا دخلتم بيوتا فسلموا على أنفسكم تحية من عند الله مباركة طيبة كذلك يبين الله لكم الآيات لعلكم تعقلون. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and when your children reach the age of puberty, let them seek permission to come in as their seniors do. This is how Allah makes His revelations clear to you, for Allah is all-knowing, all-wise. As for the elderly women past the age of marriage, there is no blame on them if they take off their outer garments without revealing their adornments. But it is better for them if they avoid this altogether, and Allah is all-hearing, all-knowing. There is no restriction on the blind or the disabled or the sick, nor on yourselves if you eat from your homes or the homes of your fathers or your mothers or your brothers or your sisters or your paternal uncles or your paternal aunts or your maternal uncles or your maternal aunts, or from the homes in your trust or the homes of your friends. There is no blame on you eating together or separately. However, when you enter houses, greet one another with greetings of peace from Allah, blessed and good. This is how Allah makes His revelations clear to you, so perhaps you will understand. So in ayah number 59, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that when your children reach the age of puberty, they should seek permission at all times before entering into your homes, as we saw in ayah number 58. Okay, so this is obviously when they are adults and children that have reached the age of puberty, then they would seek permission, which means that children that were not at that age yet and that have not been, they're not aware of people's aura and things like that, because of how young they are. They don't need, like, if you have a 2-year-old, that 2-year-old doesn't need to seek permission when running into the room. Okay. But once children reach the age of puberty, then they must definitely follow the ruling in ayah number 58. Just as Allah makes clear the rulings of seeking permission for you, He also makes His verses clear. Okay, and sometimes if they're not clear to you, that's because perhaps you don't understand the Arabic, maybe you don't understand the context, and so they're not clear. But ultimately, they are clear, and they are particularly clear to the scholars because they have the requisite knowledge and they understand the context. Just think about this. Someone who understands Arabic and who has memorized the entire Quran, do you think that that person is in a better position to understand and to have a broader understanding than the person who doesn't have those two skills or those two sets of knowledge? I think it's very clear that the person, just because the person who's a hafiz and understands Arabic knows that that particular meaning has been mentioned in 5 or 6 or 7 other places in the Quran. Like if someone who's memorized the Quran and who knows Arabic just thinks about the story of Musa, well, then they can go back to Baqarah, they can go back to Taha, Surah Al-Qasas, Surah Al-Shu'ara, many places in the Quran where they can sort of start taking different meanings and sort of bringing those things in together. I listened to a cassette tape. Yes, a cassette tape. Those things used to exist, believe it or not. This was way back in 2000, maybe 2002. And so at the time, we didn't really have access to the internet or CDs, right, in Medina. But there was these cassette tapes, and I had this sort of album with all these cassettes in. From Sheikh Muhammad ibn Salih al-Uthaymeen. I forget what the topic was. I think it was on the topic of the etiquette of seeking knowledge, right? I think so. It was his explanation of his book regarding knowledge. And in there, he was telling the students that he wants them to do a study of the story of Musa, but he wants them to take all the different parts of the story in the Quran and bring it together and create the narrative, like from the beginning until the end of the story from all the different places. Because, for instance, the conversation between Musa and Fir'aun, like only in Surah Al-Nazi'at does he say, Ana Rabbukumul A'la. It's not mentioned in any of the mention of the story in other surahs. But only in Surah Al-Nazi'at does he say, Ana Rabbukumul A'la, I am your highest Lord. So now, of course, you need to take that ayah from Surah Al-Nazi'at, and then you have to sort of mention it in the section of the story where there's this, dialogue between Musa and Fir'aun. But anyway, that's just a thought, and maybe perhaps another reminder to myself and to you that we need to expend considerable effort in memorizing the Quran and also studying and learning Arabic. Because I guarantee you, with Allah's permission, that if you do those two things, then doors of knowledge, if we are sincere and if we are dedicated, then Allah will open up doors of knowledge that you just can't imagine. Because this is the way that we're supposed to do it. You know, I wish I understood this when I first started. But then again, I didn't have a mentor. I didn't have someone. I was basically working it out all of on myself. So I made a lot of mistakes and I went down paths that were not as beneficial because this is the way. If you read the biography of almost every single scholar that has ever existed, that has ever lived, then you almost inevitably, it's almost guaranteed that you are going to read that he memorized the Quran when he was a child. Okay, and if he was 7 or he was 8 or he was 12, and mashallah, he had finished the Quran memorization. And then he went to study, Arabic, and he learned how to read and write and things like that. That's the beginning. And then once you've done that, then you can move on to doing other things, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So Allah is ever aware of the requirements of His servants, wise in whatever laws He passes for them. In the next ayah, which is ayah number 60, Allah says, and the elderly women that no longer experience menstruation and can no longer give birth, nor have any desire to marry again. Okay? There is no sin that Allah did not only mention that they are elderly. Okay, وَالْقَوَاعِدُ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ فَلَيْسَ عَلَيْهِنَّ. No, there was another condition. لَا يَرْجُونَ نِكَاحًا, that they have no desire to marry again. There's no sin upon them if they do not wear some of the outer garments, overcoat and veil, as long as they do not expose the beauty they have been commanded to conceal. However, for them to wear those garments is better for them than to discard them, enhancing veiling and chastity. And Allah is all hearing of your statements, none of them are hidden from Him, and shall requite you for them. This ayah is essential for helping us understand the ayat about the jilbab and the khimar that have been mentioned in other places in the Quran. Because those women and men who say that there is no order for a woman to cover her head in the Quran, and for her to, sort of wear hijab and to cover herself, then how do they explain ayah number 60? Because what exactly is this woman allowed to uncover? Can a woman, let's say that she has gone through menopause, let's assume that she's 60 years old. Like how can she walk around in a dress with her head uncovered? Is that what this ayah is allowing her to do? Which Muslim scholar has understood this ayah to mean that now she can take off her abaya and, she can wear a short sleeve, sort of like if it's in a warm climate like Malaysia, she can walk out there in a dress, in a short sleeve, dress and, with her hair uncovered and, all of her jewelry and she can even wear perfume now. And this is, in public, of course. Is that what this ayah is allowing her to do? And no Muslim scholar has understood that from this particular ayah. It's always interesting. Even yesterday, I came across something that, the hadith that where the Prophet ﷺ spoke about this, a woman who beautifies herself and she wears perfume and then she passes by a group of men. The main reason she's doing that is to gain the attention of those men. And the Prophet said that, she's a zaniya, meaning that she's guilty of committing zina. And so, feminists will look at this hadith and just many Muslims in general, and they will say, oh, this hadith, astaghfirullah, this can't be authentic, all these ahadith that you claim that the Prophet, this is only to suppress women and, and so on and so forth. But which scholar in Islamic history has understood that hadith means that if a woman purposefully, she beautifies herself and she perfumes herself, to gain the attention of men, that she is guilty of zina and then she should be flogged 100 times? And no scholar has ever understood that from this hadith. So the hadith is authentic and it has been authenticated, right, by Ibn Khuzaymah, Imam al-Tirmidhi and others. So the hadith, authenticity is not the issue. It's what you are doing is you have created an understanding of the hadith, and then you have attributed that understanding to the scholars, and the scholars are absolutely, innocent of that of that claim. So what's happening here is you are basically lying against the scholars. This is what the person is doing, and we have to be very careful. And so, why wouldn't we first ask, Sheikh, what does this hadith mean? Oh, okay. Oh, I see. All right, then there's no issue then. But that doesn't happen. So what people do is they already have this preconceived notions about hadith and about Islam, and so they just roll with that. They couldn't be bothered to ask Muslim scholars what the hadith means and what is the context, and what has been the accepted understanding of this hadith over the centuries. That doesn't matter. And that's sad. It's sad that we're not even going to take the time to do that. And what's equally sad is the fact that Muslims do not, or people do not have this attitude with other areas of expertise. It's only in Islamic matters where they feel that now being an expert or having knowledge is not important. Everything else is important. You want to build a house, you go to an architect. You don't draw you don't come up with the plans yourself. You go to an expert. The same thing with medical issues. If you are starting a new factory, you get an industrial engineer to come in and to advise you. Get a consultant to tell you exactly what the specs should be, etc., etc. They don't just decide these things on your own. But when it comes to the deen, well, mashallah, everyone's a mufti, everyone's a muhaddith, everyone's a faqih, and even though that is absolutely, it's absolute nonsense. But hey, we move on, inshallah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though He allows women to, greater scope in this ayah, but He says it is better for them not to do that. So if a woman has passed menopause and she no longer has any interest in marriage, it's still recommended that she wears a hijab properly with all of, in the same way that a younger woman would wear it. And that would be better, because Allah is hearing of your statements. Nothing is hidden from Him, and He shall reward you for that which you do. Why are elderly women mentioned in relation to this ruling? Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mention elderly women who do not want to marry? Why are elderly women mentioned in relation to this ayah specifically? Now, what are your thoughts? إنما خص القواعد بذلك لانصراف الأنفس عنهن إذ لا مذهب للرجال فيهن فأبيح لهن ما لم يبح لغيرهن وأزيل عنهن كلفة التحفظ المتعب لهن. Yes, the fact that there's no attraction, at least in most cases. All right, there's no attraction there. There's no fitna that is feared. Okay, in the sense between younger women and younger men. So that's the reason. So, and that shows us that the issue of hijab, the issue of this is to prevent fitna. All right, it is to prevent fitna. And you look at, for instance, there's this social experiment where in New York City, where a woman, she walks around, dressed normally, or rather in more revealing clothing, and there are catcalls and men wanting just comments about the normal thing. I'm not even going to try to imitate that. And so men are definitely sort of, what's the word, making their interest known. Let's use a euphemism. And then that same woman walks around the same area later with an abaya. She has her head covered, and she's wearing like a black cloak, and she's also walking through the same streets. Almost nothing. It's just, I mean, this like almost no. The reaction is completely different. So in the one clip or the one part of the video, she's walking around and she's dressed in revealing clothing. Not very revealing, but like just normal sort of no hijab. Let's use it like that. And then again she walks. And I also noticed this when I was going to Hifz school in 1999. So I would be standing at the taxi rank, at the taxi stop, waiting for these minibus taxis to pull up so that I could, get a ride to school. And the girls that were going to the Islamic school, they were dressed in the hijab and they were dressed like in these uniforms that covered their whole bodies. And the men in that area didn't really talk to them, didn't, initiate conversations, didn't make comments about their bodies and about how beautiful they were, and didn't try to flirt with them. And the other girls that were going to like the normal, sort of high school, they were wearing, short skirts and, they had their hair exposed, etc. And everybody wanted to talk to them, like the taxi driver would say, oh, come and sit with me in front and, things like that. And I thought, wow, but then at the time, it didn't really register the way it registers perhaps now, in terms of like, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has legislated these different things, because no one understands us better than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we move on. Then in this very lengthy ayah, which is ayah number 61, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that there is no sin upon the blind who has lost his eyesight, nor upon the lame or the sick, if they leave those responsibilities that they can no longer fulfill. Like, an example of that would be jihad in the way of Allah. O believers, there's no sin upon you in eating from your own homes or the homes of sons, nor in eating from the homes of your fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, and many other relatives, nor those homes which you have been entrusted with safeguarding. There is also no sin in eating at the house of your friend as it is customary to please him. It is not a problem whether you eat alone or together in groups. So when you do enter any homes like the ones mentioned above, or any others, greet those within them by saying Assalamu alaikum. And if there is no one inside, then you should still say Assalamu alaikum wa ala ibadillahi salihin, and the pious servants of Allah. Then this is a blessed greeting from Allah. And He has legislated it for you because of the love and affection that it spreads amongst you. And just think about how many times you've met people, they are not from the same country, and they asked if you were a Muslim, and they were so happy to see you, and they said Assalamu alaikum, and you said Wa alaikum assalam. But I will mention this though, that I was in Thailand or in Cambodia, I forget now. And yes, I think it was Thailand. It was in Chiang Mai, and I greeted this couple, right? So the wife is wearing niqab, and the husband had a big beard, mashallah. And they were running the stall, and I went there, and they were selling like these waffles with Nutella on it, and I wanted to get one. And then I said Assalamu alaikum, and they wouldn't greet me. I assumed that they thought I was a tourist and that I wasn't a Muslim, and that I was just greeting because I sort of picked up this Assalamu alaikum somewhere, and then I was using it, with them. And I thought, oh, that's weird. And that has happened in other places as well. Where you see a Muslim, you greet them, and this has happened in Malaysia as well. They seem reluctant to reply because they doubt, not doubt, but I think they're convinced that you're not a Muslim. So that's quite interesting. Allahu musta'an. But you know what? Just while we're on the topic, I think that many Muslims around the world, they think that only they are Muslims. I don't know. I mean, just bear with me for a second. Like only they are Muslims, right? Maybe if they met maybe if they have a certain idea like Arabs, okay, Arabs are Muslims. And I think they'll be very surprised if they met an Arab that was a Christian. They'll be like, oh, this is confusing. All right, I don't know what to do here. But I think that we have this idea that anyone outside of our ethnicity or sort of our community, that it's very difficult for us to understand that person is also a Muslim. Okay, like for me, I'll give you this example. I grew up in Cape Town, right? So most of the Muslims in Cape Town are either of Malay descent or Indian descent, right? Okay, Now, what happens if you meet a Bosnian Muslim? Like, oh, blonde hair, blue eyes, this person looks like a white person. This, are you Muslim? And that was shocking to me when I went to the Islamic University of Medina, because now you have Muslims, you have Turks and you have Bosnians and Albanians and people from Kosovo, and they don't look like your typical Muslim. I put that, in quotation marks, like we understood, growing up. So alhamdulillah, it's good to understand that Islam is a global religion, and that Muslims come in all shapes and sizes, and and cultures, etc. But anyway, the main point here in this ayah is to talk about the idea that there's no sin upon you, there's no issue if you eat in the homes of others, but as long as you follow the etiquette that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has clearly mentioned in this particular ayah. Okay, now if any person mentioned in this ayah does not give permission, what is the ruling? Okay, so if you don't get permission to enter someone's home, if you want to enter someone's home and any one of these people that are mentioned in this ayah don't give you permission, then what can you do? What should you do? So so this ayah is also telling us it's not permissible for you just to walk into someone's home, open the fridge and take out things and start eating and drinking, right? That's haram. Unless the person gives you permission. So what happens when the person doesn't give you permission? What should you do? I think it's pretty clear what needs to happen. We've discussed this briefly before. If someone says no, then you have no choice but to leave. You walk away, and you're not allowed to insist. So you're not allowed to insist and tell the person, listen, yes, but you're a Muslim and I'm a Muslim, and I have rights. And no, if the person gives you no permission, the person you shouldn't enter a home without permission, nor should you eat without permission. Okay, that is clear, inshallah. Why is the house of the son not mentioned in this particular ayah? Even though in the tafsir that you saw on the screen, it spoke about. In fact, let me go back there and highlight it, inshallah ta'ala. There's no sin upon you in eating from your own homes or the homes of sons. Now, I want to make it clear that that was not mentioned. Okay, let me see if I can blot that out. Okay, so that wasn't mentioned in the Arabic. It did not say وَبُيُوتِ أَبْنَائِكُمْ or بُيُوتِ بَنَاتِكُمْ. It didn't mention the houses of your sons or daughters. But that's understood. But the question that we have here is, why is the house of the son or daughter not mentioned specifically? The scholars have a very specific understanding. Because your son's house is also your house. Exactly. That's exactly what Imam al-Qurtubi says. He says, لِأَنَّ بَيْتَ بْنِ الرَّجُلِ بَيْتُهُ, because the house of your son is like your house. Okay, so if my father, or if my father-in-law came to visit me, then he wouldn't need to seek permission, nor would he have any issues if he wanted to walk straight to the fridge. Now, my father-in-law, we might have to discuss that a bit further. Why? Because if there's the husband and the wife, and the husband is responsible for the nafaqah of the wife, and then of course, it's from that perspective, it is the husband's food and the husband's house. But you get the point, inshallah, that children take a different ruling, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Why has Allah mentioned the friend with the relatives? أو صديقكم. So Allah talks about your house and your children's houses, and your brothers and your uncles and aunts, and like your siblings and your more distant relatives like uncles and aunts. And then your friend, why mention that? So Allah mentions the friend after the relatives. The question is why? Why mention the friend with the relatives in this context? Anyone? Think about your relationship with your friends and your relationship with your relatives. Just on a sort of personal basis. Yes, because you have that. They may not be mahram, okay? Yes, that's also true. But mostly because of the close relationship that you have with your friends, especially good friends, right? Close companions, like your best friends. They are sometimes even you spend more time, and this is what I wanted you to think about. You spend more time with your friends than you do with your relatives. Right? You see your friends every day, like you have colleagues that and friends at work or at university or school. And yes, like they would be the ones you would most likely visit, and they would be the ones more likely to visit. When's the last time you had your uncle and your aunt over? Okay. But you had your colleague from work, he and his wife, or the wife and the husband, you had them over like twice in the last month before Ramadan. But you've probably never entertained your uncle and his wife, at your home, like just the two of them. If you did host them, you hosted them as part of a bigger family function, and Allah knows best. I had this idea when I was still living in Cape Town, that I would invite my whole family like to the park, for like a barbecue. Just get all the relatives, like I've got more than 40 cousins, so just get them all, to come and visit. That would have been good, and Allah knows best. What is better at the time of eating, joining together or separating? Like Allah says that there's no sin upon you if you eat together or separate. But what is better? So it's not haram to eat alone. But what is better when it comes to eating? And I think this is straightforward. So I will answer this because I think you all know the answer. That is that from the Sunnah we learn that there's more barakah when people come together and they eat together, right? That people should not eat separately, unless of course they know that like if I'm traveling, and I'm in the hotel room alone and I have my meal, of course there's no one to eat it with. Okay, if I'm on the airport, this has happened many times before. I'm waiting for my flight, to my destination. I'm in Dubai or in Doha and waiting for my connection, 3 4 hours, and I'm hungry. Most likely I'll be eating that meal alone, right? I'm not going to start just inviting strangers. Excuse me, just thought that would be funny though. I want to practice the sunnah. Can I get all of you people to come and sit around my table? Doesn't really happen. Okay, so unless you are part of a group, a company of people, then you would be eating together. Otherwise, you'd be eating separately. But it's always better to eat together, and there's more barakah in that, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best.
Sure.
Also in this ayah, Allah says, give salams to each other, meaning give salams to yourself. And so what does that mean? What does this mean? You're giving salams. فَسَلِّمُوا عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِكُمْ فَلْيُسَلِّمْ بَعْضُكُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ لِأَنَّ الْمُسْلِمُونَ كَأَنَّهُمْ فَخٌ واحد من تواددهم وتراحمهم وتعاطفهم. Give salams to each other on yourselves. What does this mean? Shaykh Sa'di, rahimahullah, he mentions a particular meaning here. كأنهم شخص واحد. So he says it's as if, because the Muslims, it's as if they are just one person because of the affection and mercy and connection between them. So you greet when you enter your own home, and when you are even when you are alone entering your own home. Giving salams to yourself is like giving salams to everyone, to all the other Muslims, because the ummah is like this one body. And it's very difficult for Muslims to wrap their head around that for a number of reasons. It could be because of racial or ethnic sort of, concepts. It could be the nation state and matters of nationality, citizenship, the boundaries that we have sort of drawn around ourselves. What else is there? It could be because of madhab issues. I'm a Shafi'i, you're a Hanafi, I'm a Salafi, you're a Ash'ari, that type of thing. I say Salafi, maybe the better word there would be Athari, right? But you know what I'm saying? So we create all of these divisions, and then we stop thinking of ourselves as an entire, as an ummah, because we've sort of demarcated and we have created sort of lines between ourselves and barriers. But something for us to think about. So the last question is, why is the greeting called blessed? So Allah describes the tahiyyah and the greeting as blessed. Why? Why is it blessed? Anyone? Yes, it's blessed because it has dua, and also because it brings about affection between people. Immediately when someone greets you, it changes everything. Someone says, "Are you Muslim?" "Why, yes, I am." "Wa assalamu alaikum." "Wa alaikum assalam." And then all of a sudden, your interaction with that person changes immediately. And salam has that. So you're making dua for the person, and you're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant them peace and mercy and blessings. And that then entails a closer relationship, or a sort of breaking of the ice, and the fact that it's going to create affection between you and the person that you are greeting. Alhamdulillah. And so for that reason, it is blessed. All right. Now we are on page 358. It is permissible for elderly women to not wear some outer garments. Any doubts about that are settled. Okay. So an older woman doesn't have to be as strict as a younger woman in relation to her clothing. And so, of course, that I'll keep it simple, inshallah, because I think it's clear. That ayah number 60. Taking precaution in religion is a characteristic of the mindful. Characteristic of the people of taqwa is that they take precautions, and they go to greater lengths to ensure that they are obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Which ayah gives us that meaning? Like they're going to go beyond what is required, and I think it's clear, or at least that meaning should be clear to us. Like you have, for instance, you can do this, but to take greater precautions, you want to do more, right? And just ensure that you are keeping the boundaries and you are far away from that. So yes, ayah number 60. Genuine excuses are means having genuine excuses are means having responsibility lessons, or if genuine excuses means having responsibility lessons. So if the word "are" there just creates problems in that sentence. Okay. So if you have genuine excuses, your level of responsibility is reduced. That's the meaning that we take from that. Right, ayah number 61. Number 4, a Muslim community is one in which there is shared responsibility, cooperation, and brotherhood. It can only be ayah number 61. Right, so it's that was simple, I think, or easy. Maybe let's move on. Seek permission when visiting those mentioned. We only have 3 ayat, so I'm going to go through this, because there's no real what's the word? Like sometimes when there's like 10 ayat on the page, then it takes time. But seeking permission when visiting those who are mentioned, of course, ayah number 61. Speak about the importance of hijab and modesty. That could be ayah number 60. And then say the basmala when entering your homes and greet following the sunnah. Again, ayah number 61. Okay, so I'm not going through it very quickly, but only because it's pretty self-evident at this point, okay, where those points are coming from. Then what about points of guidance? Okay, this will require some more thinking. Allah closes all paths to sin. Which ayah makes that very clear? The fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cuts off the paths that lead to the sin. He doesn't just say that this is prohibited, don't do it. But he also cuts off and he legislates in such a way that the avenues to that sin are also reduced. So what are your thoughts? Which ayah tells us that that is the case? نعم. Ayah number 59, ayah number 60, but ayah number 60 more specifically, right? There's no sin upon you. No, that ayah is not necessarily talking about this concept. We're talking about zina, we're talking about, immodesty and so on. So the fact that, an elderly woman is still encouraged to still wear hijab, because just because she's elderly doesn't mean that, she can't fall into zina. This still happens. Elderly men still fall into zina. So just because you're elderly doesn't mean, and just because you are elderly doesn't mean that no one will be attracted to you, right? That's another issue, because we live in a very strange world. I don't want to go into too many details with this, but we live in a very, very strange world. Where there are obvious issues of deviance, and where people have just their fitrah has been completely corrupted. Okay, and then you have other issues where what people find attractive is such a broad spectrum that when we just we'll spend much time talking about that. But yes, ayah number 60 is what the authors had in mind. The Sharia is made easy by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Sharia is made easy by Allah. The Sharia is given, it's made easier by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it allows us to, if we don't have the ability to do certain things, then the responsibility falls away. So the Sharia is made easy by Allah. This one should be easy, I think. Which ayah do you think are we talking about here? It should be ayah number 61, very easy. And the beauty of the Islamic greeting, that's also ayah number 61. So we'll keep it simple, inshallah. What I want to do now is I want to read these last ayat of Surah al-Nur and the translation, so that tomorrow, inshallah, we can just focus on this, and then perhaps also start Surah al-Furqan, inshallah. But we'll see. So let's read these ayat. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. إنما المؤمنون الذين آمنوا بالله ورسوله وإذا كانوا معه على أمر جامع لم يذهبوا حتى يستأذنوه. إن الذين يستأذنوك أولئك الذين يؤمنون بالله ورسوله، فإذا استأذنوك لبعض شأنهم فأذن لمن شئت منهم واستغفر لهم الله، إن الله غفور رحيم. لا تجعلوا دعاء الرسول بينكم كدعاء بعضكم بعضا، قد يعلم الله الذين يتسللون منكم لواذا، فليحذر الذين يخالفون عن أمره أن تصيبهم فتنة أو يصيبهم عذاب أليم. ألا إن لله ما في السماوات والأرض قد يعلم ما أنتم عليه ويوم يرجعون إليه فينبئهم بما عملوا والله بكل شيء عليم. The true believers are only those who believe in Allah and His Messenger, and when they are with Him on a public matter, they do not leave without His permission. Indeed, those who ask your permission, O Prophet, are the ones who truly believe in Allah and His Messenger. So when they ask you your permission for a private matter, grant permission to whoever you wish and ask Allah's forgiveness for them. Surely Allah is all forgiving, most merciful. Do not treat the messenger's summons to you as lightly as your summons to one another. Allah certainly knows those of you who slip away, hiding behind others. So let those who disobey His orders beware, for an affliction may befall them, or a painful torment may overtake them. Surely to Allah belongs whatever is in the heavens and the earth. He knows well what you stand for. And on the day all will be returned to Him, He will inform them of what they did, for Allah has perfect knowledge of all things. So, in the next lesson, inshallah, we will complete our study of Surah al-Nur, inshallah. And perhaps if there is a time, we will focus on at the beginning of Surah al-Furqan and mention a few things related to the surah, and then also perhaps look at the first two ayah of Surah al-Furqan, inshallah. So that's where we'll end our lesson today, and inshallah, we hope to continue again tomorrow. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.